Chapter 5, Elements of the Emotional System. As previously defined, a system is a group of interacting, interrelated, or interdependent elements forming or regarded as forming a collective entity. So, of course, the family emotional system also contains basic elements or components that require consideration. Symbiosis. In his work with schizophrenics, baby, stop. In their families, Murray Bowen, 1988, discovered that hospital staff reported some interesting occurrences among family members. As a patient began to improve, members of the patient's family would complain either that they had observed worsening symptoms or that someone else in the family had become ill or dysfunctional. Bowen also observed a reciprocal emotional interaction between the mother and patient that he labeled the mother. And the patient, they labeled the mother-child symbiosis. Bowen concluded that some kind of powerful emotional force worked within the family system to maintain a balance of conflicting forces. Symbiosis, as described by Bowen, is a two-person system in which responsible individuality does not nor cannot develop. It is as if each person lives only for and vicariously through the other. Each person in the symbiotic relationship seems compelled to ensure at any cost the other person's emotional comfort. Fuck off. One person can only be comfortable and happy when the other is comfortable and happy. They sacrifice all their personal goals and self-needs to ensure short-term peace and harmony. In a symbiotic relationship, any attention or attempt of one of the partners directed away from the other and towards someone outside the relationship is likely to be viewed by the other with extreme jealousy or a feeling of rejection. They may expect that any chosen activity should include both parties. Any attempt by one to be involved in some activity without the other may be met with faked illness, accusations of not being appreciated, or some subterfuge to disable the plans. To maintain stability in the relationship, even insignificant decisions by one are likely not to be made without the approval of the other. For example, a mother in a symbiotic relationship with her daughter devotes a considerable amount of energy to maintaining that relationship. The mother may consider the relationship between her and her daughter as that of best friends and may resent the daughter's attempts to acquire friends of her own. God damn. The mother may accuse the daughter of not appreciating all that has been done for her. Although a symbiotic relationship is most often noted between mother and child, it can also exist between others. One couple with which I worked some years ago, both alcoholic, was an extreme example of this kind of relationship. Everything one did had to include the other. They excluded other people, including members of their extended families, from sharing any of their time together. The wife accompanied her husband daily on his delivery job. Their children were often neglected because they interfered too much in the couple's togetherness. As a result, the children were eventually placed in foster care. Both parents said they loved their children and wanted to regain custody. However, they were more concerned about preserving their status quo than making the necessary changes. As a result, neither of them were able to achieve any degree of recovery because they were so emotionally dependent on each other. At some point, one or both participants in the symbiotic relationship become frustrated or angry at having sacrificed so much for the relationship, particularly if they begin to feel they're not getting enough in return for their sacrifices. Tension surfaces and attempts at harmony fail. When tension begins to surface, it then incorporates a wider relationship in a process that Bowen calls fusion. This wider relationship may now involve the other parent or other siblings, or in the case of a married couple, someone outside the immediate family. When this fusion with another person occurs, the symbiotic relationship changes from a dyad to a triad. But triangle, not triad. What? Okay. Triangulation. Kerr and Bowen, 1988, consider the triangle to be the basic molecule of an emotional system. The dynamics of a triangle preserve equilibrium in the three-party system. As long as anxiety remains low, a two-person system can remain fairly calm and stable. As tension or anxiety increases, however, a third part... Okay, I'm back. It was Elena. Where was I? As tension or anxiety increases, however, a third person is drawn in and becomes involved in the tension of the twosome. The added third person creates a triangle. The involvement of the third person decreases the anxiety in the twosome by allowing tension to be shifted around the triangle. This reduces the possibility of any one relationship emotionally overheating or erupting. According to Bowen, triangles exist in all females to some extent, but may never become symptomatic. Almost every family has one child who is more triangulated than the others and whose life adjustment is not as good as that of the other siblings. Because tension can be shifted around, the triangle offers more flexibility than does the two-person relationship, figure 5-1. Unfortunately, within the triangle, a 2 against 1 dynamic often appears. The third person, C, who completes who completes the triangle may be expected to resolve or may be held responsible for the problems between A and B. Most often, a poorly differentiated child occupies this position with a parent. For example, a daughter, B, in a symbiotic relationship with her mother, A, may begin to rebel against the mother's control over her life and present some kind of problem or behavior. When the tension reaches a certain level, the mother may draw in the father, C, to help control the daughter. With both parents focusing on the child, the conflict between mother and daughter can be temporarily set aside. Bowen further describes triangles as having a basic character with which to stabilize or destabilize a twosome. A stable twosome can be destabilized by the addition or removal of a third person. Conversely, an unstable twosome can be stabilized by the addition or removal of the third person. The third person may be a new baby or a child who leaves home. For example, if the conflict between the marital partners ceases following the entry or departure of the child, the change has had a stabilizing effect. If conflict arises in a harmonious couple after the addition or departure of the child, the change has had a destabilizing effect. The emotional circuitry of a triangle, once established, is usually perpetuated by involving others. In other words, if one person of the triangle dies or leaves, another person will, because family stabilization requires it, step in to fill the vacancy. Because children often act out I'm missing a page. What's happening? Because children often act out conflict that was never resolved between their parents, the triangulation can continue into succeeding generations. The more enmeshed the family, the more triangulation is necessary to ensure some sense of emotional stability in the system. The family can contain tension within the triangle as long as they can shift it around the three sides. However, when the tension of the triangle becomes high enough, it spills over to pick up a vulnerable fourth person, figures 5-2. If that person's participation then adds one or more new triangles, thus forming a small network of triangles, or what Bowen refers to as interlocking triangles. For example, mother, A, and daughter, Judy, B, of the triangle get into conflict over appropriate dress, and older sister Sue, C, temporarily withdraws from the triangle. The mother, A, pulls in the father, D, to help settle the dispute with Judy, while Sue engages in another triangle with the father and the brother. This process can continue until personal triangles within the family have been exhausted, and the tension then spills over into the public arena, involving police, social workers, and counselors. A really successful extension of the triangulation process has occurred, for example, when outside social workers are arguing with each other about individual or family treatment needs or consequences to be imposed on one family member, figure 5-3. In the meantime, the family becomes calmer and more united because the pressure has been taken off of them. There you go. A common triangle that might exist is between an adult and child and the parents. Suppose, for example, that every time Jane visits her parents, the mother takes her aside and starts complaining about the father. Jane may feel good about being taken into her mother's confidence and may even feel she can help her parents resolve their problems. But in fact, this alliance with the mother is destructive to all three relationships: Jane and father, father and mother, and Jane and mother. Siding with her, mother alienates her father. It also makes it less likely that the mother will do anything about working out her problems with the father. Although this triangle may give the illusion that Jane is closer to her mother, it is at best only an imitation of intimacy. Nor would Jane's defense of her father be a solution. That would only move her away from her mother and would widen the gulf between mother and father. As long as the triangulation continues among the three parties, a personal and open one-to-one relationship cannot develop. The simplest and most direct approach to the situation would be for Jane to suggest to the mother and father to work out the problem between themselves and to refuse to become involved or even allow the mother to confide in her. The functioning positions of members in a triangle can be fairly rigid and somewhat predictable. Bowen describes them in relation to an anxiety being experienced. The anxiety generator is the first person in the triangle to become anxious about the situation, is often held responsible for initiating the upsets. The anxiety amplifier adds to the problem by reacting in an agitated and exaggerated manner to the anxiety of the generator. The anxiety dampener remains emotionally distanced in reaction to the problem until the tension is great enough that he or she will become overly responsible in an attempt to calm the others down. Although the tension may be reduced temporarily in this scenario, the problem remains unsolved. The dampener only further reinforces the triangle, and no one takes responsibility for managing his or her own anxiety. For one person to attain emotional So I just got a text. Okay, although the tension may be reduced temporarily in this scenario, the problem remains unsolved. The dampener only further reinforces the triangle, and no one takes responsibility for managing his or her own anxiety. TBA. Okay. For one person to attain emotional separation or differentiation from such a family, detriangulation must occur. Effective detriangling depends on one person achieving some degree of emotional detachment from an emotional neutrality regarding the family. The person must communicate the position of emotional neutrality to the rest of the family and must change his or her basic way of responding to family problems. Emotional neutrality doesn't mean that one becomes indifferent or to or judgmental of other family members' problems. God damn it. It must, however, involve a conviction that finding a solution for problems of others is their responsibility. Even if they don't seem to be doing it right, assuming an attitude of people have a right to be wrong can help one remain neutral. Detriangling is not an easy process and takes time, practice, and experience. Other family members often become so threatened by one person's attempt to detriangle and seek emotional separation that they impose consequences. Relatable. The family's imposed consequence might be to give the defector The silent treatment, accuse the person of being disloyal to the family, or even completely exclude that person from a family. Holy shit, that's my dad. A prevailing attitude among the other family members involved in the triangulation is often, if you're not with us, you're against us. God damn, fuck this book. Emotional maturity, or self-differentiation. Bowen considers self-differentiation as a person's ability to adapt to stress and to distinguish between the process of feeling and intellect. In other words, the degree of self-differentiation is the degree to which one can choose between being guided by feelings or thoughts and being engulfed in the emotional problems of others. Self-differentiation has nothing to do with intelligence or education level, only the degree to which a person is emotionally mature and can function independently in life. The level of emotional maturity at which one functions lies on a continuum from very poor to high. At the lower end of the continuum, people experience a high level of chronic anxiety. Sir? They are emotionally needy and highly reactive to the actions and feelings of others. They have difficulty maintaining long-term relationships and cannot differentiate between thoughts and feelings. They tend to make assumptions about what is right for others and to become triangulated with them. Their daily functioning is almost totally governed by their emotional reactions to others. The self is so poorly developed that they experience love primarily as neediness and attain a sense of completeness only with an emotional attachment to another. The person is not separated from the family of origin, and such a person often remains in an unsatisfactory relationship because it's better than nothing. And the opposite end of the continuum, the emotionally mature person can think objectively in emotionally sensitive issues, yet can respond appropriately rather than simply react. The person can communicate needs and wants openly without emotional reactivity. He or she assumes responsibility for self as well as for his or her own feelings and happiness. Such a person can function without being affected by praise or criticism and has a freedom to enjoy rather than just need relationships. He or she experiences inner security and a low level of anxiety. The basic level of emotional maturity is fairly well established by the time a child reaches adolescence and usually remains fixed for life. Terrifying. Change may occur because the person has an unusual life experience or tires of a dysfunctional lifestyle, which may force a person to make a focused effort to raise his or her function level. However, the odds of people at the extreme low end of the continuum even making the effort to change are not very favorable. If they seek to improve their life situation and happiness, the attempt will likely amount to efforts to find someone to fix them or to fix another person involved in the situation. I have had many clients, both men and women, who come into counseling because their relationship has dissolved and they cannot adjust to loneliness. They've become so preoccupied with the misery of being apart and lonely that they cannot function adequately. Some are so incapacitated that they cannot perform their jobs adequately. Such a person's sense of completeness is based solely on being in the relationship. It's not unusual for the breakup to be only temporary, and this person may even return to an abusive relationship. Or they may shift their expression of undying love to another person who may come along. If either of those events occur, they will stop therapy because they perceive their life as being all right again. Most people want to be individuals, but are not emotionally developed enough to give up togetherness to achieve more individuality. People are often willing to be individuals only to the extent that the existing relationship system approves and permits it. Anything else is considered too risky for the relationship. For instance, a woman may have someone she considers to be a very good friend, but will give up the friendship because the man she's currently involved with either disapproves of the friend or is jealous of time spent together. But for mature people, giving up togetherness does not mean giving up emotional closeness. It does mean that one functioning becomes less dependent on the approval and acceptance of others. Possessing emotional maturity is a way of being, of living, or of experiencing life. The better developed this self, the more a person can act to enhance his or her personal welfare without impinging on the welfare of others. Conversely, a lack of emotional maturity and the need for togetherness result in partners encroaching on one another and functioning at another's expense. In an emotionally healthy or well-differentiated system, people can maintain their emotional autonomy. In such a system, triangulation is minimal because the system's ability does not depend on it. Depend on you. Okay, fuck you. Developmental factors. Every human being enters the world totally dependent on others for survival and comfort. In most instances, this dependency rests in the primary caretaker, the mother. Because of this total dependence and because mother and infant respond so automatically to one another, Bowen considers a symbiotic relationship to develop naturally. However, as a child grows, a series of age-specific developmental tasks must be accomplished for that child to become a unique individual and develop individuality and emotional maturity. As long as the child is fulfilling an emotional need for the parent, that cannot occur. The greater the emotional maturity of the parent, the more the child's development will be based on reality. For the child to develop adequately, the parents have the task and responsibility of functioning in ways that permit that individuality and emotional maturity to emerge. Bowen further contends that parents typically function in ways that result in their children achieving about the same degree of emotional separation from them that they themselves achieve from their parents. The ability to develop emotionally is also tied to the characteristics of a person's relationship with parents, siblings, and other important relatives. Depending on the particular relationship each child has with the parents, one child may achieve a little more emotional separation, from the parents than another child in the same family. In families with a high level of emotional maturity, a child is permitted to grow, to think, to feel, and to act responsibly for him or herself. This allows the child to develop individuality and achieve emotional separation from the parents. Such a child views self, parents, siblings, and others as distinct and separate individuals. The child's self-image is not formed in reaction to the anxieties and emotional neediness of others. The child can develop a consistent system of beliefs, values, and convictions. In essence, the child grows to be a part of the family, yet has the ability to emotionally separate from it. Conversely, in families with a low level of emotional maturity, a child is not permitted to grow, to think, to feel, and to act for him or herself. The child learns to function in reaction to others with behavior based more on emotional reactiveness than thinking. As an adult, having achieved very little emotional separation from the family, such a child continues to have dependent relationships. Such adults often still need to gain their parents' approval. They are not emotionally separated. Fucking relatable. Detachment versus disengagement. Nearly everyone has some unresolved emotional attachment to the previous generation. However, the lower the emotional maturity, the greater the unresolved dependency in the individual's own generation, which is ultimately passed on to the next generation. A family with high dependency needs becomes enmeshed. When enmeshment exists, appropriate personal boundaries are not present. The enmeshed family has an intense sense of loyalty and closeness that minimizes disagreement among its members. Incest is more likely to occur within extremely enmeshed families. Okay, that gross. Disengagement involves family members that have either physically and or emotionally dissociated from the family. However, even though the members have disengaged and perhaps physically separated from the family, the conflict among the parties has not been resolved. This disengagement is simply an emotional cutoff. It is actually a symptom of enmeshment with the family of origin because it is a means of avoiding conflict resolution. Disengaged individuals may yearn for emotional closeness to their partners, but run from it because the unresolved conflicts are too painful for them to deal with. According to Bowen, Denying the importance of one's family and building an exaggerated facade of independence from the family are two sure signs of emotional cutoff and a lack of conflict resolution. Detachment, in contrast, is a state of emotional neutrality. It requires the ability to see both sides of a relationship process between two others and make a choice to not take sides or become emotionally involved. A person's observing and thinking about what might be occurring between others is not clouded with perceptions about what should be best for others or the misperceptions that he or she can help solve the problem. Any conflict that may have arisen in the past has been successfully resolved. Not relatable. Multi-generational transmission process. You like my shirt? Okay. Projection is one of the ego defense mechanisms of self-deception. The person assigns his or her own unacceptable thoughts and impulses to another person. In other words, it is always the other person's fault. The other person who initiates the behavior or behaves to cause the inappropriate action of the first person. Kerr and Bowen, 1988. A lot happened in 1988. Defines projection as being part of the multi-generational transmission. Multi-generational transmission is the process by which the generations pass down levels of functioning, strengths, and weaknesses, and family patterns to the next generation. Although specific behaviors may be altered from one generation to another, the basic patterns of emotional functioning and relating to others remain. Bowen describes the family projection process as the transmission of parental, emotional, undifferentiation, anxieties, and immaturities to a child. The most basic component of the transmission process is the deep emotional attachment between mother and child. The more intense the unresolved symbiotic attachment, the more a child's development will be influenced by the needs and fears of his or her family. If emotional separation between a mother and child has not been achieved, the child's image of the mother is affected by his or her own emotional needs and fears. A well-entrenched symbiotic relationship can be seen as a mutual projection process. Mutual projection generally operates within the father-mother-child triangle, where it centers around the mother-child relationship. The mother usually puts the most time and energy into the children and makes the greatest emotional investment in them. The projection process begins with the mother's anxiety about the child and her concerns about her ability as a responsible parent. The child responds anxiously to the mother's anxiety, which in turn, the mother mistakes for a problem in the child and addresses it with increased attention and overprotection. Thus, the cycle of reciprocating anxiety is set up between mother and child. The mother, in her anxiety, continues to infantize the child, who in turn becomes increasingly more demanding and impaired. The father, pulled in by the mother-child emotionality, becomes sensitive to the mother's anxiety. To calm and reassure her, he plays a supporting role to her in dealing with the child. This completes the triangle. Generally, parents tend to raise children to be at the same level of emotional maturity as themselves, or lower. The more intense a triangle, the more likely a child is to end up on the lower maturity level than the... I love you so much. Bye. Then the more intense the triangle, the more likely a child is to end up on a lower maturity level than the parents and to mate with someone of equal low maturity. However, a child who grows up outside this parental projection process can reach a higher level of maturity than that of the parents and select a mate of equal or higher maturity. To alter these less functional patterns, the individual must decide to change personally and to develop neutrality about people and situations that produce emotional effects. Looking closely at the family generational relationship can reveal past patterns and provide a clue as to what is happening today. It also helps predict what is likely to occur in future generations. Steinglass, 1987, has described the system's view of alcoholism as it relates to the generational transmission process. He sees alcoholism as a continuous process occurring in family development. The family with an alcoholic member struggles with the issue of whether or not to accommodate to the alcoholism of one member and whether to include it as part of their family identity. Okay. The family identity involves the members' attitudes and beliefs that define the family. It also incorporates their beliefs and attitudes about alcohol or chemical use. As the children form families of their own, they may organize their new families around the identity formulated by their families of origin, or may accept only part of their family's identity, or they may have become so repelled by their childhood experience as in an alcoholic family that they exclude it entirely from their new family identity. Boom, me. Exercises. 1. Reflect on families you have known that have contained a symbiotic relationship. Describe that relationship. I can help with that. 2. Considering the chemically dependent family, describe an example of a triangle involving each of the following changes. A. Stabilization, unstable twosome by the addition of a third person. I can help with that. B. Stabilizing an unstable twosome by the removal of a third person. C. Destabilizing a stable twosome by the addition of a third person. And D. Destabilizing a stable twosome by the removal of a third person. 3. Within a chemically dependent family, describe a scenario in which a person shows that he or she has emotionally detached from the family. I can help with that. 4. Describe a scenario in which a person shows that he or she is disengaged from the family. Chapter 6.